So, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us for this special live session. I'm Itzik Amiel. Those of you who do not know, and we're here with a weekly Switch interview series. We call it Switch It On. We will talk with smart and talented people and how you could switch on your practice and your life. And you all invited to join us. But before I start, and I do it every week, and I want to call all of you listening to us now, I want to share my sincere support for the people of Ukraine. We see what's going on around us, for all the friends we have there, the colleagues, the lawyer that I know for so many years going there. I'm thinking and praying and great for you. And I know it's not enough. All of us, I'm saying all enough thinking and praying is not enough. I'm really asking each one of you to join us to find what you could do today to help these people. Take an action, do something. Not just think and pray. It's not enough because it's not about nationality, about race, about color, about religion. We're all human. We need to stick together against war and get all these horrible things happening in our world. So today we're going to talk about internal communication myth, and I want you to feel free, by the way, to put in the chat box. Let us know who you are, where you're dialing from, because I want Mike, our guest, to see that because I want the interaction over here. So if you're here, if you're joining us, put in the chat box in the comments your name, who you are. See people joining us. Thanks a lot, Michael. Thanks a lot, Dan. See you, great from England. Mike from the Netherlands, I assume. And I see Mike yourself. Our guest is also chatting. Great, awesome. But all of you joining us, I see you joining. I see Diana, Ali, David. All of you, please type in. We would like also Mike to see that. Because I have an honor today to have this live session with a true friend, true international communication expert. And to them, I guess, as I mentioned before, Mike Klein. But before I invite Mike to join us, let me give you the short highlights about Mike. And I like to do it behind people's back because none of us like us people reading about us when they are there. So Mike is still in the back room, and tell you about him because before he became an international communication consultant, Mike worked as political consultant in the U.S. for 8 years, and with nearly 2 decades, I think it's been more than that of experience in international communication. Mike has penned a book about social dynamic in large organization titled From Lincoln to LinkedIn. He currently authors a blog, Changing the Terms, which advocates selective engagement and strategic approach for internal communication. Mike is a past chair of the IABC in Europe, Middle East, and North Africa, and he is an MBA graduate of London Business School. I think without further ado, Mike, I think I should bring you in. So welcome, Mike, and thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you very much, Itzik. It's great to be here.
And we are happy first to have you with us and to have the time to come to share the knowledge with all our community. And I know we're here all for a treat. So again, thank you very much for joining. But
My pleasure.
let me set the stage for our conversation because I want to dive in more to specific things. Because this session we dedicate to this important subject of internal communication, very much also to the professional firm, those who are joining us from professional firm as well. We want to approach that as well for that angle because it was, I think, established that internal communication is really critical, if you allow me to say, for organizational success. Because top performing professional firms that invest in effective employee communication are directly improving their financial performance. While most professionals believe in the value of communication, and I know it myself, for business success, of course, and driving value for their own practices, there are still gaps that exist in how professionals and professional firms use internal communication effectively. And in this session, I want to discuss a few myths that surround internal communication and take the opportunity with you, Mike, to your help to dispel them at the best of your abilities, of course, to do so. But I like to start all the session with what I call 10 in 1, Mike. So there are 10 questions in 1 minute. So I just wanted very fast overview on a lot of subjects because we cannot cover everything today.
6 seconds each.
Exactly. It depends on your answer. But I encourage all of you there who are joining us, all the audience joining us, you can also type your answer in the chat and send on Mike is answering to see how you are doing as well. Okay. So, Mike, if you're ready, I'll get set and I'll pull the first one. Are you ready, Mike? Yeah?
Let's go.
Okay. So, here's the first one. Internal communication directly connected to a firm's success? Is it definitely, absolutely not, or not indirectly? Or only indirectly?
Definitely. Definitely. Either when you do it well or badly. Definitely.
Okay. Number two, internal communication. Does one model fits all firms or tailor-made to each firm?
Tailor-made to common principles.
Great. Number three, internal communication. The task of a firm communication department, the leadership, or everyone in the firm?
The department, the leadership, and everyone have distinct roles. It's not just let's abandon it to everybody. It's not let's just have the management do it. They each have their roles to fill.
Great. I mean, I cannot trick you. You're too intelligent to give me tricky questions. Number four, what is the most important for firm, internal or external communication?
If you get the internal right, the external will follow.
Awesome answer. Where are we now? Number five, right? Is employees' engagement is part of internal communication affected by it or not connected at all?
Let's park that one. It takes a lot more than 6 seconds.
Great. I know we're going to touch upon it. Number six is technically allowing us to make is technology allowing us to make internal communication more human or less human?
More human, particularly in a professional services context.
Right. Number seven, improving internal communication also improve the overall customer experience. For sure, you are not sure or totally BS.
You would hope so, but that's not the purpose of it. And I wouldn't drive internal comms with a customer experience angle. I think there's much more to it than that.
Right. I know we're going to touch upon those in our conversation. Number eight, leveraging on internal communication strategy will improve employee retention rate. Is it spot on or far from the truth?
That's if you want to improve your employee retention rate. If that's what you need to do, you can definitely align your internal comms strategy in that direction. The question is that really what you're trying to do? And if so, why?
Right. If you know what you want to do, you will achieve it. Number nine, do you think that due to the corona crisis, the law firm internal communication become more important, less, or the same?
The same. Corona is yet another crisis. It was a big one, a long one, a very pervasive one. So is the war in Ukraine. So is the next one. Internal communication has a lot to do with the resilience of an organization. And so it's no less important from one crisis to another.
Which, by the way, that answer is probably surprised a lot of people because everybody likes to say it's changed a lot, but they like it that it's the same because we always have crisis and we're all going to have crisis.
Absolutely.
Number 10, the last one, Mike. You cannot measure internal communication. Is that correct statement? Partly correct or myth?
Of all the myths we talked about, this one's the biggest.
Awesome. And I know we're going to touch upon it. So great. So we touched upon very fast those 10 question statement I wanted your input on. And I think that brings us to the second part of our conversation today. And I'm encouraging first, before we start, everybody is joining us. First, put your name. But more than that, you're very welcome to ask your question during the discussion with Mike. Mike will answer. That's the whole idea of this session. So I have my own team, but if you come and ask yours, I'll put my aside and let you ask yours. So please participate in the chat. You can type your question. Everybody will see it as well. So you get your exposure, your brand. But at the same time, Mike will be able to look at it and answer it. Okay. So I know, I mean, from you, Mike, in the current status of internal communication within the corporate world, within the professional firm, if you allow me. And that's the first question connected to that. So maybe we'll dive right in and ask you, what are the biggest mistakes companies make or maybe professional firm make in terms of internal communication?
Well, professional services firms, law firms, accountancy firms, consultancy firms have some unique internal comms characteristics. You have a lot of peers who communicate with each other. You have certain hierarchies that are based on competence and experience, as well as just simply, where the senior leadership prefers to have certain individuals in the structure. So there's some particular communications and hierarchy dynamics in professional services firms. But the mistakes are by and large pretty similar. An excessive focus on control, the belief that you can control your messaging, either control how it comes out or how it lands or what else is coming up along with it. There's a huge focus in, kind of what I call high value organizations, where you've got a relatively small number of people commanding and delivering a very large amount of financial value. There's often much too much focus on events, collectibles, stuff that requires a lot of work, but doesn't produce a lot of impact. Another common mistake is hiring people who are too junior or too inexperienced. I mean, there's this idea that everybody's a communicator. So, given that everybody's a communicator, let's just hire somebody who's well organized, or let's just hire somebody who's smart, or let's hire somebody who knows how a firm like this operates, rather than somebody who's got specific skills, training, and orientation towards how internal communication works. Because the biggest mistake that a lot of organizations make is that they try to engage everyone equally rather than aiming towards the right people. And they focus a lot on broadcasting, pushing, driving messaging top down, rather than identifying who the people with the actual influence are in the organization and getting the right messages to the right people, either through the influence structure or through using the right kind of technology that allows you to target effectively.
And it's probably a big firm, right? Because they have a lot of personnel. Small firm cannot afford it because they don't have enough personnel.
Well, the technology is becoming a lot more affordable.
Exactly.
You don't need to spend $1 million or $100,000 on a decent internal communication software package anymore. Exactly. And this is another mistake that organizations make. They cheap out. They use off-the-shelf tools for their internal communication when they wouldn't dare using basic free tools and exposing their customers or their external partners to it. And so, and this lack of respect shows up, in the retention numbers. If it's so much more difficult to message somebody inside your firewall than it is to use Instagram, to use Facebook, to use LinkedIn, at some point you're going to say, why am I going to bother with this shtick? So, neglecting technology, focusing too much on control, spending too much time on money, making stuff fancy and making it posh, hiring inexperienced people, and trying to engage everyone equally. Those are the biggest mistakes that organizations make generally, and in particular in your sector.
Great, thanks for that, Mike. And I see people are still joining us. So those who are joining us, thank you very much for being here and showing your face, staying where you are. I see Adam and Dan and Mike and Michael and David and Diana and Alex. Those of you who do not put your name, please put your name. And I recommend you also ask questions directly to Mike. He would love to answer you. But if you don't ask, I'll continue asking him. And please feel free again if you want to chat in the chat to do that within LinkedIn. So Mike, those of you do not know, by the way, I'm talking to Mike Klein. He's an expert in internal communication, and we talk about the subject of internal communication myth. So Mike, let me ask you the next question, because many of our viewers are probably asking themselves, and I know I asked it many times, maybe you have the answer to it, but does getting your internal communication right is a big commitment?
It is a big commitment. But it's not necessarily a big budget commitment, and it's not necessarily a big process commitment. It's not necessarily a hell of a lot of work. What it is it's a big shift in orientation. It implies a change in belief from the idea that you can just control everything. You can just tell people what they will do and they will do it. Or you could just expect people to do stuff and it magically happens. It requires you to recognize that your organization is dynamic, that you're not in control, and that there are other people with power and influence and reach that you need to connect with. And you need to make sure that what you want is also what they want and vice versa. That's the big commitment. It's a much bigger commitment, kind of, intellectually and spiritually, than it is financially. And it's not about as much of committing resources. It's more to Itzik's game. It's about committing attention properly. This is really about managing attention and stimulating and harnessing and spinning attention in a dynamic, but at the same time, influenceable and manageable way.
which is, of course, by itself a very difficult task because many of us don't even know where it should go and where it comes from. So how do you direct it? I mean, if you know where it comes, and that's exactly the expertise you talk about. That not every person who have seniority or have some experience can do that because it demands more than that, much more skills and abilities. Although you're right, everybody's communicating by talking, but it's totally different sort of communication we're talking about that really influence the bottom line of firms, influence the behavior of people that stay loyal and longer term, influence a lot of stuff. And I know from my experience, those are the things why I left firm. The communication was so bad. When the merger and acquisition happened, nobody told us what's happening. There's, firm split, don't know what's going on. And because of miscommunication or lack of communication, everything collapsed. And then, so I love what you're saying because we understand the power of it. And I'm seeing still people joining us and not asking questions. So I'm continuing my questions to you. But I mean, I want to thank those of you joining and still joining us. I see more people joining. If you can, if you have questions for Mike, ask it in the chat. And I'll recommend warmly to you to just put your name, where you're from, so we know you are with us in the room and listening live to this information. I'm with Mike Klein, as I said before. We're talking about internal communication. Those of you interested in more learning about what Mike, what his work, what he's doing, I'm very welcome you to check his website. I mean, and just to put it now before it will be too late, his website is changetheterms.com.
Or even better, just check my LinkedIn profile. I practically live on LinkedIn. So, and most of the content that I'm pushing these days, I'm actually pushing through LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile can be found at MKLEIN818. And we can pop that in the chat.
Absolutely. And of course, if you don't want to miss any of the bi-weekly Switch On interview series, follow us on LinkedIn or in the Switch Up website. You can sign up, get the business development strategies and tips, and you can be added to the list where you will find regular reminder about all the fantastic guests we'll have also today, like with Mike. So, Mike, research I read by Gallup from 2020 showed very clearly that good internal communication leads to stronger employee engagement and therefore maybe better organizational performance. So, Mark, what is your intake on it, and what's the difference actually between internal communication and employee engagement?
It's interesting that you bring up the Gallup survey and the Gallup definition of employee engagement, because Gallup has this unique survey. It's called the Q12. It asks people a variety of questions like, do you have a best friend at work? Do you feel like you're supported? And these are all nice and important questions, and they add up to an index of kind of sort of how people feel about their company and their job and what they do. And there's a correlation between this magic Q12 score and the way organizations believe that they're going to perform. But I've never been a believer in Gallup's Q12 study, far from it. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face in internal communication is that internal communication people are tasked with increasing this magic Gallup Q12 score from year to year. They say, having good internal communication leads to good scores on the Q12. Well, having a successful business also leads to good scores on the Gallup Q12. The question is that it's the cart driving the horse. And that we have the pursuit of Q12 scores driving internal communication and even driving, certain activities, particularly on the HR side. I mean, running a business to your Q12 score is kind of like trying to run a plane to its speedometer. The direction also has something to do with it. The extent to which people are belted into their seats also has something to do with it. Employee engagement, it's a nice secondary measure. If we stop focusing on employee engagement, we could start focusing on stuff that we could actually make a difference on. Wow. Organizational performance, alignment, people knowing what they're doing, reducing ambiguity, reducing chaos in organizations by dealing with specific measurable stuff. I strongly encourage anybody who's an internal communicator who has employee engagement as one of their measures to do whatever they can to try to throw that off their shoulders.
I see that we have already a question from Mike Nord. I put it in front of you, Mike. So he's asking, Office 365 enough to force a strong engagement level, or do we need other tools? So maybe
Well, that's an interesting question because it implies that there is a relationship between tools and engagement. There's a much bigger relationship between the way we engage with the tools and the tools that we use. Obviously, it makes sense to use tools that are aligned with the task at hand. And so I often encourage, and I work with companies that have internal comm software, that make internal comm software. And I work with them because I like the software and because I like what it does. I'm working with a company now called Sparrow Connected that has this absolutely fantastic tool that works with my Microsoft Teams and Microsoft SharePoint. It's not the only tool that's good. There's other tools that work with G Suite, like Happio works with G Suite. That's a great tool. There's, platform agnostic tools, like, there are tons of tools. It's not the tools, it's the appropriateness with which, and the resource investment that's given to the strategy for using the tool, the strategy for internal communication, as opposed to just simply having a great internal comms platform and nothing to use it with.
I love it what you're saying, because you remind me of the discussion we always have within internal professional firm about CRM system, asking which CRM system to buy. I said, don't buy any. First have the strategy, how you build relationship, then find the tool that really may make it easier or faster. And the same thing here. I guess the tools are always secondary. First have the strategy. And a lot of people don't understand internal communication. So no tool will help you if you don't have a strategy. It's just going to
exactly. Or if you're spending all of your money on the tool.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of folks in the tool business who are charging a lot of money for these tools. And the companies say, okay, we'll spend this money thinking we're getting a solution. What you're getting a tool that you don't have the bandwidth to operate.
Absolutely. So, Mike, I want to be very practical in this session because we're listening to us. Our time is limited. We have very short, limited of time today as well. So help us out to give some very more practical advice to our global professional community. So what are some simple steps that can make this difference we're talking about?
Well, I think the biggest piece of advice that I can give is ask open-ended questions. It's the most important advice that I could give, because if you're not asking open-ended questions, you only understand what's in your knowledge set. So, is it this or this? When in fact it could be that, and that's not in the question set. And so you're kind of predisposing yourself to fix a problem that doesn't necessarily exist. Right. So you've got to, research, and use of open-ended questions is absolutely critical.
We have a question here from Adam first, Mike. I'll disturb you a second. It's a long question, so let me read it for you. He said, what advice do you have for, thank you a lot, Adam, by the way, for your question. What advice do you have for working with senior leaders who think they know internal communication, but whose approach undermines good communication? For example, leaders who are not receiver-centric in their messaging or don't value employee feedback. So maybe you can connect it to the steps you're sharing with us now.
Well, I think there's two sides of it. One is you need to understand what the leader's objective is. You need to know why the leader is as, dare I characterize what you're saying is that the leader's bullheaded. Well, you need to know which direction those horns are pointing at. And you need to be at least as committed as that leader is to helping that leader achieve their goal. Because at least A, that will give you a frame in which to contribute, but B, it may give you some additional credibility for when you do the second piece, which is seek forgiveness, not permission. Because if you've got a leader who has, genuinely tangible, positive ambitions and is sabotaging them through their own behavior, the best thing to do would be to ask people what, where their alignment is with those positions and where the gaps are in achieving it, and then be able to present it back to that leader in their words, not in your own. It comes back to the use of open-ended questions. When you use open-ended questions, it produces quotes from individuals that could be presented back to senior management that are much more difficult to dispute than just simply your opinion. Because if your opinion against hers, you lose.
Mm.
If it's your employee's opinion against hers, there may be a conversation that ensues.
Nicely done. I hope Adam it's answer your question. I mean, Mike, do you wanted to add anything about the steps, or I can ask you the next question?
Well, I think some other pieces to look at are really looking at your organizational influence structure. And there's a number of different survey methodologies. I use something called Snowball Method. A firm that I've worked with over the years called Innovisor is really good at something called organizational network analysis. These work very well in professional services environments. They're worth the money and time to do it. And then finally recognizing that in a business in general and in a professional services environment in particular, you've got a multi-directional culture. It's not top down and it's not even two-way. It's multi-directional. And you need to recognize the conversations that take place between employees as being every bit as important. And not just between employees, but between employees and customers, stakeholders, decision makers outside of your firewall. Those are your key external communication conversations, and they really get seeded through internal communication.
Great, awesome. I mean, those of you are joining us, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's not too late. We're still in conversation. I'm here with Mike Klein. He's an expert in internal communication. We have a lovely conversation and beautiful question by the audience. So if you have any question, put it in the chat box. I'd love to put it in front of Mike. And without further ado, I'll come to the next question I have for you, Mike, and I prepare, of course, in advance. And the next one is more related to the core of internal communication. So, how do you keep internal communication from just creating a lot of noise in the business, if you want to say, or a lot of noise in the practice that many people think it is?
Well, it actually comes back to Adam's question. When you've got the part of it is, are you reporting to somebody who thinks they know internal comms better than you do? If you are, then you need to get the proof that there's another way to look at things. If you've got the freedom to do it, you need to focus on keeping the noise down as opposed to just simply allowing the free flow of messages between and around people in the business. People need to know what's important. They need to know why it's important, and they need to know what their role is in driving the importance of that thing. So those are your key agenda items. And obviously prioritization, both at a communications level and at a leadership level, is absolutely crucial, because that's what gives you the ability to filter the less important messages and the less important voices, or move them to parts of your platform or your conversation that are not necessarily as focused as those on the actual deliverable business priorities of your organization. So the key thing is, when you've got somebody professional who's a trained internal comms person who thinks strategically, you're going to have much more success. Or if you're using an external consultant to support somebody and bring somebody up to speed, you're going to be in much better shape than if you've got somebody, you give them a bunch of tools and you leave them to figure the stuff out for themselves.
Right, awesome. And I think everybody should understand that's role getting more and more important, because, I mean, even for the sake of the crisis we're getting, I mean, just starting with that point, there's so much importance that internally, externally, that I could see where you're talking about that was always there. People see more or more being aware of that within firms. And I hope they will pay attention to what you advise here, not just to take everybody to use. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the audience have any question before we're gonna round up our discussion. So I'll call you out. If you have any question, ask now for Mike. That's your time. And if you don't do it, I'll summarize it. You can ask it in the meantime, and I'll put it to Mike. But I want to summarize this great session with you, Mike. And I know you have a lot more to share, and I will encourage everybody to check you out on LinkedIn, on your website. And I found a quote that I love from Anita Roddick, founder of The Body Shop. And she said about, regarding internal communication or communication in general, that the key to handling problem and conflict within organization is to keep the channel of communication wide open. And I think that's the case, not to close, not the silos. When you are open, communicating, you're authentic, you're sincere, you'll find the right people to help internally or externally, consultant that can get you the right thing. So now, my friend, it's time to take action, implement at least one thing that Mike shared with us today. I promise you it's worth it, and I promise you can learn more about it. I mean, I've been here with Mike Klein. Those of you just joining us now, is an expert and consultant in internal communication. Again, check him out on LinkedIn, check his website, and I will approach him, ask questions afterward as well. I'm sure he would be glad to help you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I want to thank you, Mike, for it. It's been fantastic again to see you as my friend, but also hearing your wisdom. I love it every time. So thank you very, very much for that.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And anybody who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, just go to MKLEIN818. And if you've got any private questions, more than happy to discuss them there.
And Mike and myself want to thank each one of you who joined us today. I know it was short, but as we say here in Holland, short and powerful. We're here every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central European Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. So do not delay. It is your time to switch it on. Bye.